Thank you all so much. It really is an honor to be back in India. And I want to especially thank Rohini for her visionary support of mental health and for her understanding that we're all on a continuum. And where we choose to draw the line is really arbitrary. And what I will give you a glimpse of today is the simple idea that humans have the innate capacity to flourish. And this capacity is something that can be nurtured. And every human being has this capacity. And in fact, we have the moral obligation, I believe, to do everything we can to help nurture flourishing in all of humanity. And the very future of humanity, I believe, depends on this really critical but simple idea. So I'd like to begin this journey with a little autobiography. In the early part of my career, I focused on the adversity side of the equation and studied the brain mechanisms that were associated with anxiety and depression and stress-related disorders. And then in 1992, I met the Dalai Lama. Now, this is a picture taken in 2001 when the Dalai Lama came to visit our lab in Madison. This was in the very early days of functional brain imaging. And we were showing him here how we can use the methods of modern brain imaging to interrogate the structure and the function of the human brain. And he was most interested in the fact that we can see changes in patterns of activation that were associated purely with mental activity. So this talk is going to be based on a book that's coming out in March of 2026, as was mentioned, called Born to Flourish, which presents many of these ideas. So if anyone is interested, they can follow up in a few months. I want to begin this talk with a little bit of bad news. And I promise you I won't dwell on this. But well-being is in serious decline in many parts of the world, including in India. And I'll share some evidence both in the US and in India. In the United States, the chief public health officer under President Biden and President Obama was Vivek Murthy, actually an Indian American, who is really a wonderful man and a close friend of mine. And when he was Surgeon General of the United States, he issued a report on loneliness and social isolation. This was published in 2023. And what he noted is that the social fabric of our lives was changing dramatically in the US. And I'll just give you a couple of data points. What he showed, if you look at the graph in the upper left-hand corner, this is a figure about social connection, and it indicates that there's been an increase of 24 hours per month over this period of time in the amount of time people spend alone in the absence of others. If you look at the figure in the lower left, this is a measure of social engagement with friends, and there is a decline of 20 hours per month in the amount of time people are spending with their friends. This is a dramatic change over the course of about 15 years. Now, one of the things that's extraordinary is that loneliness is a greater risk factor for premature mortality than is smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That's what these data are showing. If you look at the top figure, this is lacking social connection, and this is a measure of premature mortality, and it exceeds smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Loneliness gets under the skin, and it affects our biology in ways that are consequential for both our mental and our physical health. Just a few weeks after Vivek Murthy issued that first report on loneliness, he issued a second report on social media and youth mental health. And what he showed in this report is that there is a dramatic association between the amount of time that our children are spending on social media and their mental health outcomes. If you look just at the figures on the right, these are data presenting comorbid internalizing and externalizing disorders as a function of how much social media our children are consuming. And what it shows is that the more social media kids are consuming, the worse their mental health outcomes. And kids who are consuming 6 hours or more of social media are at dramatically increased risk for both internalizing and externalizing disorders. Now, this is a paper that came out just last year, and it's a study of mental health impacts of screen time and social media use among Indian kids and adolescents. And I want to just read you one sentence from the abstract of this paper. The prevalence of depression was 37.9%, anxiety 33%, high stress 43%, and low self-esteem 25.3% respectively. This is in Indian youth. And there are positive correlations between screen time and social media use and symptoms of depression, anxiety, and stress. And so these are problems that are affecting countries all over the world. And in a study that was done with 151 countries, looking at the relationship between life expectancy and well-being across these 151 countries, what you see here is that among countries where people are reporting high levels of well-being, those people are living longer. And these data are not a mere small statistical association. But if you compare the countries in the upper right-hand quadrant and the countries in the lower left-hand quadrant, these differences in life expectancy are more than 20 years. So these are huge differences. And it indicates that well-being really matters, and it affects our biology in consequential ways. So the central point of this talk is this one, that well-being is actually best regarded as a skill. It's a skill that's fundamentally no different than learning to play a musical instrument or learning to engage in a complex sport. If you practice it, you will get better. And what we and other scientists have consistently found is that the same mechanisms that encode suffering, including neuroplasticity and epigenetics, are the mechanisms that can be harnessed to flourish. So I want to move now and talk about what are the constituents of resilience and flourishing. And here we have articulated a framework for understanding the core skills of well-being that can actually be nurtured and that are instantiated in particular circuits in the brain, all of which exhibit plasticity. So this was described in a paper that was published a few years ago called The Plasticity of Well-Being. And this framework holds that there are 4 key pillars. The first we call awareness. And awareness is about being present. It's where mindfulness would be. And it also includes the capacity that neuroscientists and psychologists call meta-awareness. And meta-awareness is the capacity to know what our minds are doing, which is a fundamental prerequisite for any other kind of transformation. The second pillar is connection. Connection is about feeling connected to others, and it includes qualities that are important for healthy social relationships, qualities like gratitude and appreciation, kindness and compassion. The third pillar we call insight. And insight is about getting curious about how our minds actually work, and specifically the narrative that we all carry around in our mind. We all carry around a narrative that is a set of beliefs and expectations of ourselves. And we know that on one end of the continuum, there are people who have a very negative narrative. They have low expectations of themselves. They have negative beliefs about themselves. And of course, that's their prescription for depression. And what's important for well-being initially is not so much to change this narrative, but it's to change our relationship to this narrative so that we can see the narrative for what it is, which is a constellation of thoughts and expectations. And finally, the last pillar of well-being is purpose. Purpose is about staying motivated. It's about clarifying our values. And it's not so much about finding something more purposeful to do with our lives, but how can we find meaning and purpose in even the simple activities of daily living? Can washing the dishes or doing your laundry be connected to your sense of purpose? It can be with a little bit of reframing. Okay, so I want to now take a deeper dive and explore each of these pillars. The first, awareness. The person on the right is William James, who is America's first great psychologist. And William James wrote a 2-volume book in 1890. It was published, called The Principles of Psychology. And in this book, he has a whole chapter on attention. And James said, the faculty of voluntarily bringing back a wandering attention over and over again is the very root of judgment, character, and will. No one is compos sui if he have it not. An education which should improve this faculty would be the education par excellence. But it is easier to define this ideal than to give practical considerations, practical directions for bringing it about. And the italics are in the original William James. If William James had connection to the Indian contemplative traditions, he would have instantaneously seen that if nothing else, these provided a technology for educating attention. And in fact, modern research is confirming this conjecture. So we've embarked on a series of studies to assess brain activity in individuals who've spent years training their mind. And one group of participants that we've studied are Tibetan Buddhist monks, some of whom live here in India, some live in Nepal and other parts of the Himalayas. And we flew them to our laboratory in Madison, Wisconsin, and they spent time in residence during which we assessed their brain. And I should also just call out the work here that's being done now at NIMHANS by collaborators of ours, Ravindra and his colleagues, who are studying different Indian meditative traditions using these very same methods. So one of the first things that we saw in this study of long-term practitioners were these very high amplitude gamma oscillations that I'm showing you here. These are oscillations around 40 cycles per second, and they're very prevalent during the period when the practitioners are meditating, as you see on the right-hand side of this figure. But these gamma oscillations are also prevalent during the non-meditating resting state. indicating that these were trait differences. These were differences that pervaded their baseline state. And these gamma oscillations are associated with synaptic plasticity. They're also associated with states of insight and focused attention that other scientists have uncovered in earlier research. But the prevalence of these long duration, high amplitude gamma oscillations was not seen before this work. And it indicates that the brain can change in response to these kinds of practices. We've also seen changes in connectivity of the brain, and this is a study just for illustrative purposes with much more novice practitioners. These are individuals who are practicing for just about 30 hours of practice, and we see changes in both functional and structural connectivity, including changes in the status of the superior longitudinal fasciculus. This is a connection between the prefrontal cortex and a zone in the posterior part of the brain that's critical in the default mode. And we actually see changes using diffusion-weighted imaging in the integrity of this white matter connection from just 30 hours of practice. So all of this underscores the fact that simple practices to cultivate awareness can change the brain really quite rapidly. We can change the brain even more rapidly, scientific research shows, with practices that cultivate connection. And in one study that we did, we randomly assigned people who've never meditated before to a condition where they learned a simple strategy to cultivate compassion, where they brought people from their lives into their mind and their heart, and they envisioned a time when they were suffering. And they envisioned the eradication of that suffering, a reduction of that suffering by saying certain phrases to themselves, simple phrases, may you be happy, may you be free of suffering, and they do it in a very genuine way. And they did this for 30 minutes a day for 14 days, for 2 weeks, a total of 7 hours of practice. And the control group was assigned to receive techniques from cognitive therapy, where they were taught to reappraise a negative event in a more positive way. And at the end of this 2-week period, they received an economic decision-making task, which provides a hard-nosed behavioral measure of altruism and pro-social behavior. And what we see in the compassion group in green is that after just 2 weeks, 7 hours of training, people behave more altruistically on this economic decision-making task. This is considered by economists to be a really hard-nosed measure of pro-social behavior, of altruism. This is costly altruism. The group assigned to cognitive reappraisal training was not as altruistic as the compassion group. And what was remarkable is after just 7 hours of training, these changes in behavior predicted changes in the brain. And we see here changes in connectivity between a region of the prefrontal cortex and the ventral striatum, which is very important in motivation and positive emotion. And this connection was strengthened by this training, just 7 hours of training among people who've never meditated before. So these findings suggest that it doesn't take much to kindle these qualities and to nurture this kind of connection. These are data that were published very recently. I don't want to spend much time on them, but they show that this kind of compassion training reduces a hard-nosed behavioral measure of implicit bias. This is a big problem throughout the world. It's the source of polarization. It is what is eating away at our democracies. And after just a short period of time, we can see changes in these measures of implicit bias, and these changes persist. So here we see persistence of a beneficial change for 6 months after this training. This was actually in a group of school teachers in the United States. So now a little bit about insight. Insight, remember, is insight into the narrative that we all tell ourselves about who we are. And one way we can probe this narrative and probe this quality of insight is using physical pain. When we experience physical pain, we often say to ourselves, I'm in pain. That's something that all of us have heard others say. Probably we've said it ourselves. What does it mean to say I am in pain? Who is the I when we say I am in pain? Does it mean that all of me is in pain? Is there no part of me that is not experiencing pain? By interrogating the nature of the self in this way, we can gain insight into the nature of this narrative. And we can see if this kind of training has an effect on the way the brain is processing pain. So I want to show you the data from a study that we published now a number of years ago in both non-meditators as well as in a group of highly experienced meditators from the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. So they come into the lab, we give them an experience of pain, which in this case is thermal pain. We use heat. It's very realistic. It's a 49-degree Celsius stimulus that's placed on the ulnar area of the wrist. I've had it done to myself many times, and after a few seconds, it really feels unbearable, but we can deliver it completely safely. So the non-meditator comes in, and in this experiment, we're looking in this using functional MRI, and we are interrogating the regions of the brain that are pain responsive. We call this the pain network or the pain matrix. And we present a tone to the participants to indicate that in 10 seconds, they will be zapped with this pain. And so here's what happens. The non-meditators come in, they hear the tone, and as soon as they hear the tone, boom, the pain matrix begins to activate, but nothing has occurred other than them hearing beep. That's it. There's no painful stimulus, but the brain responds as if it were in pain. Then once the painful stimulus comes on, the brain continues to respond, and it has a very slow recovery. Watch what happens with the meditators. They come in, they hear the tone, and there is no significant increase in any region of the pain network. Zero. There's no significant activation in any region of the pain network in response to the tone. When the painful stimulus comes on, they show a very large response, and in some regions of the pain network, the response is actually significantly larger in the meditators than it is in the controls. And then they have a very rapid recovery once the stimulus goes off. This is the neural signature of resilience. Having very little anticipatory response, showing the big response when the stressful or painful stimulus occurs, and then having a very rapid recovery. And this is a learnable skill. So now purpose. There is now a growing corpus of evidence to suggest that purpose is the single most important psychological predictor of longevity among people who are 70 years of age and older. And there's a cottage industry of studies that have now demonstrated this. Let me just show you one. These data are displayed for a group of people in the 90th percentile in having a really strong sense of purpose, and the 10th percentile, people having a very low sense of purpose. And on the y-axis is the likelihood of dying within this 5-year period. This is a group of people 70 years of age and older who are matched on their medical histories at the onset of this study. And then they're followed longitudinally. And what you can see is that among people in the 10th percentile, the darker line, they are more likely to die sooner over the course of this research. And there are many replications of this study now. And so these findings indicate that purpose, particularly later in life, really makes a difference for our physical health as well as our mental health. Now, what we've become very passionate about these days is the opportunity to scale well-being. And we are doing that by taking the 4 pillars of well-being, awareness, connection, insight, and purpose, and turning them into a very simple curriculum that can be disseminated widely. And this is the Healthy Minds program. It is available in a mobile app that's totally free. It's freely available all over the world. You can download it in India. And if you go to this website, tryhealthyminds.org, you can learn more about it. We've done now a number of studies where we've demonstrated that engaging with these 4 pillars for just a short amount of time, literally 5 minutes a day for 28 days, 1 week on each pillar, is sufficient to produce systematic reductions on a measure of distress. This measure of distress is a combination of symptoms of depression, anxiety, and stress. And we've now shown this. These are 2 published randomized controlled trials. This one on the right is with a group of 600 plus teachers in the United States. We've done this now in several other countries, and we have also replicated this in studies that have not yet been published. One of those replications is on the right here in another group of teachers. This is a group of approximately 830 teachers randomly assigned to the Healthy Minds program and to an active control group. Now, we've also found in this study that when we look at the students who are taught by teachers who were randomly assigned to the well-being training, the students who are taught by teachers assigned to the well-being training perform significantly better on standardized measures of math and language ability, which is illustrated here. This is a sample of almost 13,000 students. And these findings underscore an extraordinarily important insight, and that is that flourishing is contagious. When you are around people who are flourishing, you can feel it. And when a teacher walks into her or his classroom and is fully present, is connected, has insight into their own narrative, and who has a sense of purpose in being a teacher, those students who are lucky enough to have such a teacher do better. And that is really a very powerful demonstration that cultivating flourishing in groups that influence others is an important strategy for scaling well-being and flourishing in our society. I want to share with you just a couple of findings from a very recent study that has not yet been published. This is a study with around 1,300 depressed individuals in the United States, where we look not just at changes in depression, but we also look at changes in certain biological measures in a fully remote study. I won't go through all the details, but we see here changes in depression, changes in anxiety, increases in flourishing. We also had people give us experience samples where we asked them about their mood and their emotions, but instead of asking them to fill out a little survey on their phone, we had them give us a video selfie. We created a little app that they had on their phone, and they literally just spoke into the phone and told us how they're doing and about some emotional experience that happened in the last 2 hours. We use computer vision and machine learning to extract data from this extraordinarily rich stream of data. We have the face, we have the voice, and we have their language. And again, I'm not going to go into all this detail, but we find that the use of singular personal pronouns, I and me, significantly decreases, and there's an increase in plural pronouns like we and they. This is in the spontaneous speech of participants. There also is a change in the use of adjectives, so that there's fewer negative and more positive adjectives in their spontaneous speech in these video selfies. We also have them prick their finger and put a blood spot on a paper blot, and we can analyze the single blood spot for all kinds of biological measures, including looking at changes in epigenetics and gene expression, and also looking at inflammatory markers. One of the markers we looked at is IL-6, which is a pro-inflammatory cytokine, and we find that after just 28 days of training, there is a systematic change in IL-6, a decrease in IL-6 in these participants with just 5 minutes a day of training. We also have been looking at the microbiome. We have stool samples from all of these individuals, and there is a change in the bacterial composition of the microbiome, particularly in a pathway called the butyrate pathway, which is really important in sealing the lining of the gut. And in essence, what we're seeing is changes in this pathway in the microbiome such that the individuals who go through the well-being training have a gut that is more well-sealed, preventing inflammatory bowel syndrome, or at least decreasing the likelihood and severity of those kinds of disorders. So I want to just tell you about one last study, and then I will end. And this is a study to determine if we can boost the impact of these simple meditative practices that we train people in by stimulating the brain while people are sleeping, using a very novel form of brain stimulation that is completely non-invasive. And so this is a major study that is going on in our lab, and I actually will skip these slides I won't bore you with the details, but this method is called transcranial electric stimulation with temporal interference. And it's a super cool, almost science fiction-like method. But imagine that you have two electrodes where one electrode is stimulating at 15,000 hertz, so very, very high frequency, and another electrode is stimulating at 15,001 hertz. So there's a difference of a single hertz. And the geometry of those electrodes is such that the interference frequency is somewhere deep within the brain. And we can stimulate deep within the brain non-invasively from the scalp surface using this method. And we do this, we deliver this stimulation to people while they're sleeping. They can't feel it. And the purpose of the stimulation is to increase the magnitude of slow wave activity during deep sleep. Because sleep is the major consolidator for learning that is acquired during the day. So we're teaching people these novel meditative skills during the day, and if we can enhance the consolidation of these skills by improving their slow wave sleep at night, we can boost the impact. And that is indeed what we've demonstrated in a series of analyses. This is all really new work, but in this slide, what we show is that comparing post versus pre, if you look at the bar graph in the middle, you see that participants indeed show a significant increase in slow wave activity from this stimulation. And this increase in slow wave activity dramatically predicts changes in depression. So here you see that the participants who show the largest boost in slow wave activity during sleep show the biggest magnitude of decrease in depression as a function of the meditation skills that we're teaching them combined with this neurostimulation. And we also see changes in, this is a measure of emotion regulation. These are really high associations between changes in slow wave activity and changes on these metrics that matter for our flourishing. And finally, what we're showing here is this is a change in fractional anisotropy. This is a measure of the integrity of white matter in the same superior longitudinal fasciculus. And so what this is showing is that there is a relationship between this boost in sleep that we're providing people with this neurostimulation and changes in connectivity in a key pathway that's critical for emotion regulation and flourishing. So I want to end by underscoring how important this is. When humans first evolved on this planet, none of us were brushing our teeth. I'll bet everyone in this audience spends a few minutes every day brushing your teeth. This is not in your genome. This is something that we've learned to do. And the data that I've shared with you suggests that if we spent even as short a time each day that we spend brushing our teeth, nourishing our mind and our heart, this world would really be a different place. Now, one of the really exciting things that we are beginning to explore in our center is the use of multiple modalities for cultivating these different elements of flourishing. And one of those modalities is music. And tomorrow, we're doing a workshop with Dalal Abu Amna, who is here, and she's visiting our center from Palestine. She is a musician and a neuroscientist, and she's developing methods using vocal expression to cultivate these same elements of flourishing among a wide range of people who may not be the kinds of people who would take to meditation. And so this is a really important expansion of the opportunities for cultivating these skills using different modalities. So let me just end now with a quote from the Dalai Lama. This was from a book that was on the bestseller list for quite some time. And he said, "The systematic training of the mind, the cultivation of happiness, the genuine inner transformation by deliberately selecting and focusing on positive mental states and challenging negative mental states is possible because of the very structure and function of the brain. But the wiring in our brains is not static, not irrevocably fixed. Our brains are also adaptable. Thank you very much. These are the many people who've contributed. Thank you.
I think on behalf of everybody who's here today and on behalf of everybody who's going to watch it subsequently on YouTube, just wanted to say heartfelt thanks for providing all those insights. Now, I have some questions, and I'll start off with one or two and then let Rohini take over. And I perhaps am fielding these questions because people in the audience don't have a chance to ask those questions. So I have 1,000 questions, but perhaps I'll restrict it to very few because we have only 20 minutes. I'll start off on a personal note. You started off as a research assistant in a sleep lab, and then you went on to do your PhD in psychology. What affected that transition?
So thank you for the question. It's true. When I was very, very young, actually in high school, I volunteered in a sleep lab. And what was particularly significant for me is to watch when participants were woken up at night after a REM period and they can report mental content that was associated with some physiological change. That was very meaningful to me and suggested that neuroscience was an important path to studying the mind. And so the evolution of my career was really an organic, natural one, because it was really an insight about the power of neuroscience and its application to the study of our mental life that was attractive to me in the sleep lab.
That's why, I think it's a lesson for all of us that curiosity is something that you mentioned that we must all retain for our well-being, and curiosity can actually determine the professional trajectories that you take going forward. Rohini, do you want to go with the next one?
No, I just want to first say, audience, how do we rate Dr. Richard's talk? Shall we just give him a round?
Thank you. Thank you.
I just found that so inspiring because at any age, in any geography, we have the agency to change how our brains are functioning to help us flourish better. Thank you, Richie, for all that you have been doing for so many years. My question to you is, out of these four, the awareness, the connection, the insight and purpose, with ordinary people like us here, which one is hardest to get yourself to ramp up to? Because, it's some of these things that you said feel like common sense, but common sense seems to be more and more uncommon. So out of these four, which do you think is the easiest? And can you rank them so we can at the easiest?
Yeah, I wish it were that simple, Rohini. I think that the answer is that it's different for different people. And so I don't think that there is a single formula that works for everyone. I think for some people, their minds are so distracted and chaotic and awareness, they just can't really focus. But connection, they can make an instantaneous connection with people. And it's often helpful to start there because it comes so naturally to them. For other people, one of the things that we've been exploring is what we call micro interventions or micro practices or micro supports. They're little reminders that can be sprinkled through a day that may last less than a minute. So we did this with teachers, for example, where we invited them to reflect on their purpose in becoming a teacher. Simple. Just reflect for 1 minute on your purpose in becoming a teacher and do that every day before you start the day. And it's amazing what a simple thing like that really, the power that has. And they report that this is like an elixir for their soul. It helped them navigate the adversities that they were confronting.
Are you planning that with politicians? I think because many of the politicians I know begin with a very strong purpose, and then life becomes difficult. What if we gave them reminders every day about why they started? Would that help?
You know,
To
it might.
arrive at
There
a
are some
better
politicians in the United States that may take more than that.
Oh.
But
Right.
you know, I think it's consistency here really matters. And so if we're able to do this regularly on a daily basis, and frankly, this is where technology can play a useful role to help remind people to do this on a consistent basis.
Yeah. I'll hand over to Pratima very quickly, but before that, can you tell us about your own meditative practices? Do you do it like 5 hours a day or 5 minutes a day?
I average about 45 minutes a day during regular work days.
Thank you. That's doable. Thank you. Over to Pratima.
Yeah, I'm just going to take over at that. You once said that your meditation practices are for others. What did you mean by that?
So when I sit down to meditate, I invoke the intention that my practice is not primarily about me, but it's about helping to cultivate qualities that enable me to better serve others, because that's really what it's about. It's not about me. It's really about how we can cleanse our mind and open our heart so that we can better serve others. And that really is why I meditate. It's really why I do everything that I do. There's a very famous quote from Shantideva that the Dalai Lama recites every day. And the quote basically says that I wake up every morning and I reflect on the suffering of humans, and I dedicate myself to spend the remainder of my time serving this purpose of relieving the suffering of others until suffering is eradicated.
So you've shifted the dialogue from looking at perhaps the neuroscience of disability to the neuroscience of well-being. Now, in that shift, in terms of your neurobiological understanding, is it the same kind of circuitry that's involved in both of these? Or do other circuitries kick in well-being?
Yeah, super important question. There are many answers to it. And let me give you the most honest answer, which is we don't yet know. But there's a lot to say about that. And there are a few things I do want to say. One is that the history of research, and this pertains to what we're here for, the history of research on mental illness and the treatments for mental illness are focused on reducing the symptoms of mental illness. We have actually found that if we flip the equation and we actually teach people the skills of flourishing and don't treat the symptoms of, and this is in people who are suffering from major depression, from major depressive disorder, the outcome is at least as good as any empirically validated current treatment for depression. And there is a likelihood that the methods to promote flourishing will actually prevent depressive relapse more effectively because it will be preventative. It will teach people skills of resilience.
I might just point out a little caution to that, because I wonder if the message that oughtn't to go out is that is a solution for all kinds of disorders, particularly severe mental disorders, where at this point in time, we know that there are standard empirically driven treatments. But I think the point I take from what you're saying is that for some mental disorders, these practices might work by themselves. For others, it might be important, along with any other interventions that are available, to kind of make sure that even in the worst of circumstances, you can overcome and you can flourish.
Yes, and I totally agree. And it is the case that for certain disorders, particularly psychoses and bipolar disorder, these methods are certainly not going to replace the methods that we currently have. What we do know is that these methods potentially can be used in addition to the methods that are readily available as a complement, and they may help preventatively in the future. And this is, again, an area of current intensive study.
How young should one start? I mean, what do we tell our children today who are surrounded by screens, for example? And you said awareness and constantly bringing your awareness back to the present. It's impossible. I can't do it at the screen in front of me. What about my little grandson? How early can one start?
We can start prenatally. And then
Okay, I forgot that one.
And then continue. There's actually good evidence to suggest that there is epigenetic transmission of trauma, and if there's epigenetic transmission of trauma, there also is epigenetic transmission of resilience. We've actually studied this in pregnant women in their second trimester of pregnancy, looking at their well-being status, and then following the fetus, we actually get a blood sample from the umbilical cord when they're born, and then we put the babies in the scanner, and they're sleeping most of the time, so it's actually easy to put a newborn in the scanner. And we actually published evidence showing that the well-being status of a mother during the second trimester of pregnancy is a predictor of neurodevelopment during the first 2 years of life that you can look at with MRI. And so, I think that I'm quite serious that in intrauterine life is a time we can begin. And then having a mother, a caregiver who is loving toward an infant is, I think, an important ingredient in helping to nurture these qualities. And then when the child gets a little bit older and can start doing things themselves, when they become a toddler, then we can introduce more explicit practices. And we've actually developed a kindness curriculum for preschool children that's now being used in about 35,000 schools across the world. And we've published a randomized controlled trial with the kindness curriculum showing its utility in improving skills of empathy in 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds.
That's fantastic. I'll hand it to Pratima in a second, but 26 million children will be born next year in India. Imagine if 26 million mothers could get access to this knowledge of simple practices to make those 26 million future Indian citizens much more mentally resilient. Wow, we should do that.
Yes, and you have that in your culture.
Yes. I was going to actually say that. I mean, I think, this whole Garbha Shastra and things talks about a lot of important mental health practices that can actually, be very important both for the birthing, for the child, and for the mother, because that kind of bonding is so critical.
Yes.
And going forward, and in some ways, again, connected to that, you've done a lot of work you've done published work in rhesus monkeys, looking at adversity and so on. And we know that in the animal world, a lot of collectivism is very important for survival. And you also mentioned in your talk about about an individualistic versus a collectivist kind of approach. How does that animal experimentation actually translate into what humans need to do? Because even with fish, there is enough research to suggest that when they move in a certain formation, they utilize their energy better and make sure that they are not, they don't succumb to predators around them. So what is the learning for human beings?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. I love the way you formulated it. Clearly, the group and the community, the collective is essential. We know that engaging in these practices with the support of a community is really helpful in sustaining them. And, in some of the contemplative traditions, and I think in all of the contemplative traditions, the notion of Sangha or community is really essential in facilitating the engagement with these practices. So I think it's really an important issue.
Yeah. So one is the issue of faith versus science. So I think in modern times, the last couple of decades, there have been many investigative approaches that help us to actually kind of, converge the findings from faith and science. But what can be the challenges that one can, come across, especially when one is trying to reconcile faith and science?
Yeah, I mean it's so important and really challenging, and I think that you here in India live this all the time because of the prominence of your faith traditions and the fact that India really is an extraordinary pluralistic democracy that welcomes all faith traditions. And so it's really important here. I think that that both scientists and members of faith communities can benefit from a more careful examination of the assumptions from which they come. There's sometimes an assumption that scientists approach everything in a rational way, but actually, us scientists, we have faith in our science. And sometimes it leads us to be blind to the assumptions that we make. And we sometimes confuse our belief systems for facts in a way that's very similar to, I think, religious zealots. And so I think we have a lot to learn from each other.
As the mic goes to the public, my last question is, you've got the horse to the water. Why do some horses not drink?
It's a wonderful question, and I think this is where precision, a kind of precision medicine approach will be helpful in the future. So in the realm of meditation and contemplative practices, there are, as you folks know here in India, there are literally hundreds of practices, and people try them kind of by trial and error. And so they can be led to the water, but they don't drink because it doesn't connect to them. And we have not done a good job scientifically in trying to figure out which practices are best for which kinds of people. So sometimes people ask me, tell me the best meditation practice to do. And I'll say, I'll tell you what it is. The best meditation practice that you can do is the practice that you actually do. But what that is, I think we need to discover.
I'm a firm believer that mental health has its roots in wellness, or somewhere wellness has snapped in the individuals, and it results in all kinds of bipolar, schizophrenia, etc., etc. Medication is an excellent quick fix, but medication doesn't solve the problem. It's only symptomatic. Now, how much of your wellness programs have been applied to mental health patients, and are there double-blind studies that have been done to show the efficacy beyond depression? Would it apply to bipolar, schizophrenia, and others?
By and large, no. And again, and this goes back to a question that we discussed earlier. I think that, it's important to acknowledge that there are risks for individuals with serious bipolar or schizophrenia conditions. If a person wishes to explore meditation who has one of these diagnoses, I always suggest that they do it under the guidance of a mental health professional. So I think it's complicated, and there really aren't good data. There are good randomized control trials in patients with major depression and patients with different kinds of anxiety and stress-related disorders, but not with bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. And let me just say that you cannot do a double-blind study with meditation. It's impossible because a person who's meditating knows they're meditating, and you cannot have them blind to the meditation. There are other controls that we and others have developed to handle this situation, but you cannot do a double-blind study.
My organization runs the largest preventive de-addiction program in Pune, which is the second largest city in Maharashtra. So my question is to do with the scarcity in society that we have in public health school systems in India, especially. So within that context, how do we help move the public education system towards skills where we are again teaching children to flourish instead of preventive steps to making choices which are not healthy for them?
Thank you for the question. I think the first important step is to train the teachers to flourish. And that, as I indicated, has secondary benefits for the students. And then there are strategies to bring this to the students directly. And the UNESCO organization that I serve on the governing board of, that's based in Delhi, the Mahatma Gandhi Institute for Education of Peace and Sustainable Development, actually is developing digital strategies for social and emotional learning in children that they're exploring in India and in other countries. And so I would encourage you to check out what they're doing.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. So this was a wonderful conversation. I'm sorry we can't take any more questions. I would thank very much Richie, Pratima, Rohini.